One little girl sat beside a grave, her tiny shoulders shaking as she wept into the cold wind, whispering a name only the earth seemed to hear. Mama. Her voice trembled, lost between headstones, until a dog stopped, ears tilted, drawn by a grief deeper than words. That moment, quiet as snowfall, stirred a story long left in silence. This is the tale of a war-scarred soldier searching for peace, a child longing for home, and a dog who heard what no one else could. If you believe in second chances and the quiet strength of love, like this video, subscribe to the channel and stay. Because what happens next may just stay with you forever. The wind that morning carried a dry, biting chill down from the Bitterroot Mountains, gliding over the ridges of western Montana and sinking low into the quiet town of Crow's Ridge. The clouds hung low and heavy, like old wolves crouched against the sky. Below them, Crow's Ridge dozed in a nest of pine and snow, no more than a few thousand souls hidden in a bowl of frost. It was a Tuesday, still. The kind of still Eli Garrett had grown used to. Eli, 44 years old and a former Marine, had lived in near isolation on the edge of town since returning from his final deployment a decade ago. He was tall and broad-shouldered, though the weight he carried wasn't visible. It pressed inward, not out. His once black hair was now graying at the temples, and his blue-gray eyes had the dull sheen of someone who'd seen too much and said too little. He moved with a deliberate quiet, the kind taught by combat and loss. Since the day he buried Sarah, he hadn't come down from the mountain much. But today was an exception. He pulled his dented Chevy pickup to a stop near the rusted gate of Glen Marrow Cemetery, a sloping patch of land clinging to the mountainside like it feared falling. Eli opened the door and whistled softly. A shape leapt down from the truck bed. Luna, his German shepherd. She was 6 years old, sturdy and sleek, with a coat of dark sable and amber that shimmered in motion. A former military detection dog trained to sniff out explosives, Luna had followed Eli home from their final tour and never left his side, alert, loyal, and always reading the room faster than any human. They walked together up the narrow gravel path. The headstones around them stood in quiet rows, some crumbling with age, others sharp and painfully new. Eli stopped before one he knew too well. A simple gray slab, no photo, just a name and a phrase etched into the stone. Sarah Ray, 1985 to 2020. Love never ends, it just waits. Eli crouched, knees creaking, and placed a bundle of white chrysanthemums at the base. His breath fogged against the granite. 3 years had passed, and still her name stung like a bruise pressed too hard. Sarah had been a combat medic, a tall, slender woman with the unshakable calm of someone who'd seen the worst and refused to flinch. Her hair always smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. People said she was tough, but Eli knew she was kind in a way the world didn't deserve. She patched up soldiers with shattered limbs and scolded them for skipping meals. After a near miss with a mortar blast during a night medevac, she came back changed, not broken, just quieter. They had found each other in that strange place between adrenaline and exhaustion, two damaged pieces that somehow fit. But after Eli sustained internal injuries from a roadside explosion, military doctors told him his chances of having children naturally were extremely less than 1%, they said, a technicality, a probability. But to Eli, it felt final, so he let her go. He thought it was noble, selfless even. He didn't want to chain her to a future without children. He didn't want to watch her grow bitter beside him. So he never explained. He simply stepped away, and she didn't chase after him. They never saw each other again, until her name appeared on a list of traffic fatalities in Bozeman. He rose slowly now, brushing snow from his gloves, when Luna let out a low, restrained bark. Not aggressive, just focused, alert. She moved ahead, sniffing the air with a tension Eli had learned never to ignore. He followed her down a small slope beneath a leafless oak. That's when he saw her. A child. She was curled up at the base of the tree, no more than 6 years old, wearing an oversized army green coat that swallowed her tiny frame. Her jeans were frayed at the cuffs, one sneaker loosely tied. She held a stuffed rabbit to her chest and a canvas satchel on her lap. Her black hair was tangled, her face streaked with old tears and dirt. She sat motionless, except for the occasional shiver, like she was trying not to cry out loud. Luna approached her without command and sat quietly, her ears up, her body still. The girl looked up, and in a whisper that sliced through the cold, she said, "Daddy?" Eli's chest locked, every nerve inside him jolted. What did you say?" "Mom said you'd come find me." Her voice trembled, but her eyes did not. They were large and dark and familiar in a way that made Eli's stomach drop. "She said I should wait here." He knelt slowly, Luna staying beside him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya," she said. "My mom's name was Sarah Ray, but they made her use the name Miss Linda at the home. She didn't like it. I didn't either." The world tilted. Sarah Ray. "You came here by yourself?" Eli asked, barely breathing. She nodded. "I ran away, but I'll go back before dark so they don't yell." "Who's they?" Before she could answer, a voice rang out across the slope. "There you are!" A man descended the path with brisk, practiced steps. He was in his mid-40s, tall, thin, wearing a charcoal trench coat and polished glasses. His tie was tightly knotted, and a phone buzzed in his coat pocket. His presence was smooth, quiet, almost too rehearsed. "Sorry about this," he said with a polite smile. "She tends to wander. I'm her foster guardian, Simon Blake." Luna's ears pinned back. She remained seated, but her gaze fixed on him with silent intensity. Simon extended a hand, not to Maya, but to Eli. "Thanks for looking out for her." Eli didn't move. "She said her mother's name was Sarah Ray." Simon paused, then laughed gently. She means Linda. She gets names mixed up. You know how kids are." He took Maya's hand. She didn't resist, but she didn't smile either. As they turned away, she glanced back at Eli once, long enough for something unspoken to settle in his chest like frost. They disappeared down the path. Eli stood still, Luna pressed close to his leg. The wind had picked up, dragging brittle leaves across the graves. Daddy. The word echoed again in his mind, fragile, fearless, and far too familiar. The wind had shifted by dusk, curling low through the trees of Crow's Ridge, carrying with it the scent of dry pine and something colder distant snow. Eli Garrett sat behind the wheel of his truck, parked on the far side of Main Street. Across the road stood the low brick building of Hope Haven, a non-profit that posed as a home for displaced children. He had seen the name before, in local newsletters or small-town events. But today it felt different. It felt staged, like the whole place had something to hide behind its manicured hedges and carefully painted trim. Luna, in the passenger seat beside him, had not taken her eyes off the front entrance. Her ears were rigid, head tilted slightly, muscles coiled in the total attention. He had never seen her like this, not even in combat. Earlier that day after the cemetery, Eli had driven aimlessly for nearly an hour through the snowless edge of town before turning down this quiet street. He had no plan, no proof, just a name, Simon Blake, and the haunted look in Maya's eyes. But Luna knew something. Eli trusted her instincts more than most people. The glass doors of the building opened. Simon stepped out with the same composure as before, tall, trim, dressed in a navy wool coat this time, his scarf neatly tied, hair perfect. His movements were crisp, practiced, like a man used to leading tours or giving speeches. A woman followed behind him, shorter, late 30s, with tidy brown hair pinned into a low bun. She wore a soft gray cardigan over slacks and held a tablet in one hand, walking with hurried professionalism. Her name tag glinted briefly in the streetlight. Diane Keller, assistant director. Diane had the kind of face that put people at ease, rounded features, soft voice, someone who could soothe a crying child with a few kind words. But Eli wasn't watching her face. He watched her pause when Simon turned to say something to her. Her eyes flickered, not fear, not disagreement, but hesitation. And then it was gone. She followed him back inside. Luna let out a faint, restrained whine in her throat. Her eyes stayed locked on the door. "She doesn't like them," Eli muttered under his breath. "That makes two of us." Back at the cabin, night pressed hard against the windows. The woods groaned with wind and the occasional snap of branches. Eli had built the place himself years ago, simple, sturdy, tucked into the hills, with no one for miles. It was meant to be a retreat, a place to forget the war and the woman he'd lost. But it never quite worked that way. Memories came with you, no matter how far you drove. He sat at the kitchen table, still wearing his coat, staring at the steam rising from a chipped mug of black coffee. Luna lay by the door, head resting on her paws but eyes wide open. The house was quiet, but her ears twitched at every gust outside. "She looked at me like she knew," Eli said suddenly, voice low. "That little girl, like she remembered something I forgot." Luna lifted her head. Eli hesitated, then stood and walked to the back room. It had once been Sarah's study, back when she would visit before they parted ways. After she left, he had boxed everything and stored it in an old cedar chest, sealed tight and buried beneath other old crates and supplies. He hadn't opened it in nearly 6 years, but Luna was already there. She stood beside the chest, her tail low, body still. When Eli approached, she pawed at the wood once gently and stepped back. He knelt, brushing dust from the lid, and lifted it open. Inside lay a collage of a life interrupted. A soft cream sweater Sarah used to wear when camping. Her field manual from Kandahar, pages dog-eared and annotated in red ink. A few worn paperback books. A scarf that still faintly carried the scent of lavender. And beneath it all, a bundle of letters tied with twine. He picked up the bundle, hands shaking slightly. Letters Sarah had written but never sent. Notes from their early days. A scrawled birthday card she'd slipped into his duffel bag during deployment. There was no photograph of a child, no birth certificate, just remnants of love, of things once shared. Still, something inside him shifted. Why would Sarah send him this chest a year after they split if she had truly moved on? She'd written nothing in the last letter, only placed a single pressed wildflower between the folds. Luna nosed gently at the edge of the scarf, then sat down. Eli sat on the bed, the letters in his lap, and stared at the wall. Maya's face wouldn't leave his mind, her voice, the way she had looked at him, hopeful and afraid all at once. And that word, Daddy. He whispered it aloud, and the air seemed to hold it for a beat too long. That night, he dreamed in fragments. Sarah standing barefoot in a hospital room, shadows of movement behind a curtain, a child's voice laughing in the distance, Luna barking sharply in a hallway that never ended. The next morning, he woke before sunrise. The sky outside was flat and pale, like paper soaked in milk. Luna stood at the window, unmoving. He poured kibble into her bowl. She didn't touch it. "What is it?" he asked. Luna growled. Software. Low. The kind of growl she only made when something was wrong. Not nearby, not now, but coming. Eli sat back in his chair and stared at the front door, then at the scarf in his hand. Something about this wasn't right. Not Maya, not Sarah, not the way Simon Blake had smiled without blinking, and Luna knew it. She hadn't stopped watching since they left the cemetery. Wherever Maya was now, something in her had stayed with Luna, and Luna, in turn, had kept it with Eli. He stood and grabbed his coat. If Hope Haven was hiding something, he was going to find out, and this time, he wouldn't go alone. The air in Crow's Ridge grew sharper the next morning, laced with the dry promise of snow. Eli stepped out onto the porch of his cabin at dawn, the world still cloaked in early gray. Luna stood beside him, posture alert, tail held low, her breath curling into the cold air. Neither of them had slept. Something had shifted, subtle but certain. It hummed under Eli's skin the way danger once did before an ambush. He sipped bitter coffee from a tin mug, eyes scanning the trees. In the silence of the morning, decisions had begun to harden. He needed answers, not guesses, not dreams, real answers. He pulled out his old duffel from the back closet military issue, worn and faded and packed light. A spare shirt, gloves, his worn leather notebook, a foldable camera, still functional. Then he removed a laminated ID badge from a metal box tucked beneath a floorboard. It belonged to the Veterans Support Initiative, a private donor network that occasionally funded post-service mental health programs. He'd done some consulting for them years ago, still had access to the donor portal. He clipped it to a blank lanyard. It wouldn't pass federal scrutiny, but in a small-town nonprofit, it could get him through a door. He crouched beside Luna, placing a hand on her neck. "We walk quiet. No trouble unless there's trouble. Understood?" Luna blinked once and followed him to the truck. The Hope Haven building stood still beneath the washed-out morning sky, its windows catching the first amber glow of sunrise. From the outside, it looked benign, A two-story brick structure with a front garden of trimmed hedges and a wooden sign painted sky blue and white. Hope Haven. A new beginning for children in need. Inside, it was quieter than expected. The front desk was empty. Light from narrow windows stretched across polished tile floors and beige walls lined with colorful posters. Smiling children, cartoon trees, inspirational quotes. It all felt a little too curated. A bell chimed as Eli opened the door. He walked in with quiet confidence, Luna at his side, wearing a vest labeled Service Dog, PTSD Support. A woman appeared from a side hallway. She was in her mid-40s, with curly red hair tied back loosely and small rectangular glasses. She wore a navy blue cardigan and slacks, clipboard in hand. Her name tag read, Marcia Heller, Outreach Director. Marcia had a warm but sharp gaze, the kind that measured people quickly but politely. "Can I help you?" she asked, smiling as her eyes dropped to Luna. "Oh, she's beautiful. What's her name?" "Luna," Eli said. "I'm Ray Connolly, with the Veteran Support Initiative. We're exploring partnership programs with local outreach centers. Thought I'd stop by." Marcia's smile widened, relieved almost. "Oh, we don't get many visits from donors out here. Of course. Please, let me show you around." She led him through the main hallway, talking about their programs, their children, their vision. Eli listened but kept his eyes moving, doors, cameras, vents, security pads. Nothing too sophisticated. His mind logged it all. Luna walked calmly beside him, her head slightly lowered, but her ears alert. As they passed a hallway labeled Administrative, Luna suddenly paused. Her body stiffened. Eli felt it through the leash. Her nostrils flared. He glanced down, then to Marcia. "Is that the records wing?" Marcia nodded. "Staff offices, files, intake paperwork. I could take you through the youth center first." But Luna let out a low growl, barely audible, but unmistakable. "I'm sorry," Eli said quickly. "She doesn't usually react like that. Must have picked up something." Marcia hesitated. "If she's detecting something, we did have a pest issue last month. Mice in the vents." "Could be that," Eli murmured. "Mind if we take a moment? She's trained to alert on unusual scents, part of a trauma response protocol." Marcia blinked. "Of course. Would you like me to—" "No need. She just needs a sniff. We won't go in." Marcia watched for a second, then gave a polite nod and stepped back. "I'll grab the youth coordinator. Take your time." The moment she disappeared around the corner, Eli moved. He followed Luna to the door, marked Records Authorized Personnel Only. The lock was a basic mechanical keypad. Eli scanned at dust patterns, wear on the buttons. He guessed the most common digits, tried 2 combinations, and on the third, the lock clicked open. Inside, the room was cool and dim, lined with filing cabinets and shelves. A long counter ran the length of one wall. In the far corner, a large cabinet was marked Classified International Transfer. Luna stepped in cautiously, sniffing the air. Eli moved fast. He pulled out drawers, scanned folders' names, intake forms, adoption files. Then he found it. Maya Ray. Her file was thin, too thin. One intake form, a photocopy of a birth certificate. No medical record, no transfer paperwork. The birth certificate listed her mother as Linda Ray. The father's name, unknown. Eli stared at it. The handwriting on the form was shaky, uneven like someone trying to mimic a style they didn't know well. He flipped it over. Nothing on the back. Then Luna barked sharp, sudden. She had moved to the cabinet marked Classified. She stood rigid, pawing at the lower drawer. Eli opened it. Inside were dozens of files marked Pending Relocation, each with a sticker, INTL, Tier 2 or Tier 1. He grabbed Maya's. A fresh label on the folder read, Assigned for Transfer, Category, International Dependent, Destination, Czech Republic. He stared. Luna growled again, this time toward the hallway. Footsteps. He shoved the folder into his coat, locked the drawer, and stepped out of the room just as Marcia rounded the corner. "All okay?" she asked, catching her breath. "Mouse," Eli said, tapping his boot. Under the cabinet, she reacted to the scent. Marcia chuckled, relieved. "Well, she's got good instincts. Let me show you the garden before you go." Eli nodded, letting Luna lead them away. But his mind was already burning. Maya's records were falsified. Her name, her mother's, even the destination listed, and worse, she wasn't being adopted. She was being exported. Eli drove back in silence, the folder tucked beneath his coat, pressing against his ribs like a second heartbeat. The road ahead blurred under low clouds and frost-tipped pines. Montana's wilderness always seemed to carry a kind of heavy quiet, but today it throbbed with tension. The wind scraped dry branches against the truck, as if nature itself whispered warnings. Luna sat upright in the passenger seat, her head turning back now and then toward the back seat, ears flicking. She hadn't relaxed since they left Hope Haven. She hadn't eaten either. Something in that place had unsettled her, and Eli, though calm on the surface, felt the same gnawing unease inside. At the cabin, he hung up his coat without removing the folder. Luna circled the front door once, sniffed, and settled near the fire, though her eyes remained open. Eli placed the file on the table, lit a second lantern, and opened it fully. There were no adoption details, no background checks, no interview records, no photographs. Just forged documents with Maya's name, a fake parental identity, and one glaring truth: assigned for transfer. He exhaled sharply. His military training kept his breathing steady, but the fury underneath pulsed like a drumbeat. He stared at the document again. The destination listed: Prague, Custodial Rehabilitation Services. It wasn't even an orphanage. The name was flagged in a trafficking report he'd helped vet years ago during his advisory work with a private anti-exploitation task force. His hand curled into a fist beside the paper. This wasn't mismanagement. This was organized, strategic, and it had Sarah's child in the middle of it. The next morning, Eli drove back into town, but didn't approach Hope Haven directly. He parked near the public library and walked instead, taking Luna on a leash through the quieter residential side of Crow's Ridge. The town was small enough to know who belonged and who didn't. He wore a plain brown jacket and kept his face angled down. His destination wasn't the front of Hope Haven. It was a service entrance near the back, half hidden by an old utility shed. He waited by the shed until the midday deliveries arrived. A white van pulled up with bakery goods and cleaning supplies. As the delivery man passed by with a trolley, Eli caught the door and slipped through before it clicked shut, Luna padding silently behind him. The back hallway was narrow and smelled faintly of disinfectant and cinnamon. He moved quickly, avoiding main paths, until he reached the administrative corridor. Marcia Heller was in her office, door open, talking to someone on the phone. Eli kept moving. Near the records wing, he spotted a room labeled Confidential Storage, Staff Only. The door was ajar. Luna let out a soft growl. Inside was dim and windowless, filled with old file boxes and locked cabinets. Eli moved to the far wall, where a set of labeled drawers lined the bottom half of a shelving unit. He searched for R under birth records, found Ray, Maya, and slid the drawer open. There it was. An original, creased but untampered birth certificate. Mother, Sarah, Ray. Father, unlisted. Place of birth, Missoula Community. Hospital, date, February 14th, 2018. Eli's eyes caught on the hospital stamp, an authentic one he recognized. He used to meet Sarah near that hospital when she did nursing shifts during winter rotations. But the certificate, it had been filed, then pulled, then altered. Someone at Hope Haven had swapped this version out before placing the false copy in Maya's official file. He snapped a quick photo of the certificate using his phone, then carefully replaced it where he found it. Luna gave another low whine, this time facing the hallway. Footsteps, quick and light. He slipped back into the corridor just as a young intern passed by. A girl no more than 20, with frizzy black hair pulled into a high ponytail and headphones tucked around her neck. She glanced up, startled, but Eli gave a small smile. "Printer jammed," he lied, tapping a nearby door. "Just needed a look." "Oh yeah, that one's cursed," she whispered with a grin and walked on. Outside, Eli didn't breathe normally until he and Luna made it back to the truck. He closed the door, leaned back in the seat, and let out a long, measured breath. "She's not just being moved," he murmured. "She's being erased." Luna pressed her head into his shoulder, exhaling heavily. That night, back at the cabin, Eli spread out all the evidence across the table: files, photos. His phone, screen lit with the image of the real birth certificate. A flicker of memory returned. The The way Sarah used to fold her arms when she was hiding something. The way she once refused to let him drive her to an appointment near the end of their relationship. Had she known she was pregnant then? He never asked, never suspected. They had drifted apart under the weight of deployments, his injuries, his silence. He remembered the last letter she wrote, not angry, but final, and now the silence had come full circle. Eli turned to the bookshelf in the back room and reached for a small wooden box he hadn't touched in years. It held only two things: a compass gifted to him by his commanding officer after Fallujah, and an address book Sarah had once made for him, years ago, with numbers written in faded ink. He flipped through it until he found the number for Tamara Brighton, an old friend of Sarah's from nursing school. He picked up the phone and dialed. The line rang 4 times. "Hello? Tamara?" His voice cracked slightly. "Yes? Who is this?" "This is Eli Garrett. I was with Sarah Ray, years ago. I need to ask you something." There was a long pause. Then Tamara spoke again, softer this time. "You're Eli? I thought you might call someday." The wind howled across the ridge as night pressed its weight onto the cabin. Eli stood by the window, arms crossed, staring out at the treetops. Behind him, the warmth from the stone fireplace reached only halfway into the room. The rest of the cabin lay in a hush, broken only by the soft clinking of Luna's metal tag as she shifted beside the couch. He held the birth certificate again, creased and yellowing at the edges. Maya Ray, Sarah Ray, and yet no father's name. That omission echoed louder now than any accusation. But Eli wasn't relying on documents anymore. He reached into a shallow drawer near his writing desk and retrieved a small zippered pouch. Inside was something he had picked up days ago, but had not dared examine too closely: a faded lavender hair tie, twisted and knotted with a few strands of dark chestnut brown hair. The same Maya had worn when she'd sat at Sarah's grave, the wind tugging at the bow while Luna nuzzled into her lap. Luna had gently pulled it loose before the child left, with Simon. Neither Eli nor the girl had noticed until later that night, when Luna dropped it at his feet. He sat at the table and opened a plain white envelope. Inside were instructions in a sterile sample container. He had ordered a home DNA kit using a discreet contact from a fellow veteran, someone who worked in a private lab that handled sensitive family cases. No questions asked. He didn't trust local systems, not yet. Eli carefully sealed the strands in the tube, added a swab from his own inner cheek, and packed the return box. The sample would be flown out of Missoula the next morning via overnight courier. 2 days, maybe 3. That's all he needed to wait. Luna rested her head on his boot. He looked down at her, voice soft. "You already know, don't you?" She didn't lift her head, but her tail gave one slow thump against the wooden floor. 2 days later, the results came in an encrypted email from his contact, Dr. Lena Martin, early 40s. Ex-Army trauma surgeon turned private geneticist, known for her precision and complete discretion. She wrote only a single sentence. Confirmed, biological daughter of Elijah Garrett and Sarah Ray. 99.97% match. Eli closed his laptop slowly, the words sinking like anchors into his chest. He didn't cry. He rarely did, even when pain hit bone deep. But a hand moved to his mouth, and for a long time, he didn't breathe. Sarah had a child. His child. She had kept Maya a secret. But why? To protect her? From him? From something darker? He looked at Luna, who now sat at the cabin door, alert. The dog had never taken well to deceit. Perhaps she had sensed this connection all along, drawn by something more primal than scent. The next day, Eli drove down to Kalispell, a town large enough to host federal legal offices, but quiet enough not to attract unnecessary attention. The building that housed the family court was a modest brick structure nestled between a bank and a bakery. Inside, the air smelled of ink and copy toner, and the walls hummed with fluorescent light. He met with Marianne Cole, a family lawyer in her early 50s with an iron-willed presence. Her silver hair was cropped short, eyes sharp behind thin tortoiseshell glasses. She wore a dark blazer over a turtleneck and walked with the briskness of someone who had no time for small talk. Marianne had worked on veteran custody cases before. She had been recommended to him through another former Marine. The moment he explained the situation, without names, just facts, Her demeanor shifted from skeptical to laser-focused. "We file an emergency guardianship petition. You have biological proof, a birth certificate with the mother's name, and a falsified custody trail. That's a trifecta," she said, tapping her pen. "But you'll need to swear an affidavit. And we'll need to subpoena Hope Haven for all adoption and transfer records." "They'll try to bury it," Eli said. She smirked. "That's why we file at dawn. We hit them before they drink their morning coffee." He passed her the flash drive birth certificate photo, the fake adoption file, the DNA report, and an annotated list of missing children flagged Transfer International from the records he'd glimpsed. Marianne's eyebrows lifted. "You came prepared." Eli gave a half smile. "Spent 10 years learning what happens when you don't." Luna waited outside in the truck, nose to the window, watching passers-by with hawk-like attention. She barked once when a man in a gray coat walked too close, then went quiet. That night, back at the cabin, the snow finally came. Soft at first, then heavier, blanketing the earth in silence. Eli watched it fall from the porch, a worn wool blanket draped around his shoulders. His thoughts drifted to Sarah. He hadn't told anyone, not even Marianne, about the final phone call with Tamara Brighton the night before. Tamara, Sarah's old nursing school roommate, had sounded shaken to hear from him. Her voice cracked as she spoke, her words measured but hesitant. "She told me not to call you. Not after she found out," Tamara had whispered. "Found out what?" "That she was pregnant. She didn't want to be a burden. She thought you were already buried in your own trauma. And then, when she got sick." Sick? Tamara's silence had said everything. Sarah had died alone, in a facility out of state, never registered under her real name. She had trusted no one near the end, not even Tamara. Only Maya, and whoever had taken Maya after. Eli gripped the porch railing now until his knuckles turned white, snow piled at his boots. He turned to Luna, who stood beside him, watching the woods with steady eyes. He whispered, "I should have looked sooner." She pressed against his leg in silence. The next morning, Marianne filed the emergency petition with the district court. It included a motion to place Maya in temporary custody under Eli's care, and a request to place Hope Haven under formal investigation for falsifying documents. By noon, the clerk had issued a temporary protection order, preventing the center from removing any children pending the hearing. At 2:17 p.m., the first phone call came. Simon Blake. Eli didn't answer. The courthouse in Kalispell stood like a cold, reluctant guardian against the churning wind. Clouds pressed low over the Montana sky, heavy with the promise of snow or thunder. No one could tell which. Eli stood outside the main entrance, his broad shoulders straight despite the sting in the air, a black wool coat drawn over his frame. Luna sat beside him, alert but still, her black and tan fur rippling in the wind like a worn flag. Inside, the atmosphere was no warmer. The courtroom had cream walls, a creaky wooden floor, and the faint, bitter smell of old varnish. At the far end sat the judge, the Honorable Miriam Calder, a stern woman in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and sharp cheekbones that gave no clue of sentiment. Her reputation was one of fairness and precision, known to favor facts over theatrics, but not immune to quiet emotion. The opposing side sat to the right. Simon Blake, wearing a sleek gray suit, his hair immaculately styled, and his expression fixed in public concern, like a pastor shielding children from wolves. Next to him was his attorney, Harlan Griggs, a man with thinning blonde hair, flushed cheeks, and a fondness for legal grandstanding. Together, they looked like a polished lie, and behind them, reporters, at least 6 of them. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop the pens, the notepads, and the whispering. The local news had latched onto the story fast. War veteran battles orphanage director over mysterious child. Simon had made sure of it. Eli didn't look at them. His eyes were only for Maya. She sat with the appointed child advocate doctor, Lillian Kessner, a small, kindly psychologist in her 50s, with a cardigan 2 sizes too big and hair the color of baking flour. She had spent the past few days with Maya, observing, talking, drawing. Now, Maya sat beside her in a navy dress, too formal for her frame, her knees pulled close together, and at Eli's feet, Luna. Judge Calder called the hearing to order. "Let's proceed," she said, her voice crisp. Harlan Griggs stood first, and from the beginning, His tone dripped with quiet poison. "Your Honor, while we respect the veteran's service to this country, we must question whether Mr. Garrett's recent behavior, namely trespassing unauthorized access of state records and harboring a minor, reflects the stability required to assume legal guardianship of a child." Eli didn't flinch. He had expected this. Griggs went on. "Furthermore, Mr. Garrett's relationship to the child was unknown until recently. He was never married to the mother, never listed as a parent. And, Your Honor," he leaned forward slightly, voice grave, "he lives in an isolated cabin in the woods with a former military K-9. There is concern, well-documented concern, about post-traumatic responses and triggers, particularly in children." Eli's attorney, Marianne Cole, rose calmly, not even looking at Griggs, her voice cut clean. "My client has submitted verifiable DNA results proving paternity, the original birth certificate, and a legal affidavit regarding falsified adoption records connected to Mr. Blake's organization. We are not here to speculate about trauma. We are here because this child was nearly trafficked and Mr. Garrett stopped it." A murmur ran through the room. Judge Calder nodded. "Understood. Let's hear from the child's advocate." Dr. Kestner stood. Her voice was soft, yet it filled the room with an almost sacred weight. "In the last 3 days, Maya Ray has shown visible changes in sleep, eating, and drawing patterns. Her responses to Mr. Blake were marked by tension, flinching, and avoidance. In contrast, her responses to Mr. Garrett, and particularly to the German Shepherd, Luna have included spontaneous affection, vocalization, and repeated verbal indications of safety." "Verbal indications?" Griggs interrupted. Dr. Kestner nodded. "Yes. This morning, when I asked Maya whom she would feel safest with if she were sick or afraid, she said, 'Luna and the man with her voice.' She later added that she believed Luna could hear her dreams." The courtroom held its breath. Judge Calder adjusted her glasses. "Is the child able to speak freely today?" Dr. Kestner turned toward Maya and gave a small, encouraging nod. The little girl's eyes darted from Eli to Luna, then to the judge. Slowly she stood. Her tiny shoes made no sound on the wood. The judge spoke gently. "Maya, would you like to sit up here beside me?" Maya hesitated, then walked up to the bench. Calder leaned slightly forward. "Can I ask you something important?" Maya nodded, eyes wide. "Who makes you feel the safest?" There was a pause so long you could hear the creak of wood in the heating vents. Then Maya lifted her arm and pointed. Not to Eli, not to the lawyer, to Luna. The German Shepherd sat perfectly still, as if sensing something sacred was unfolding. And then, with a small whisper, Maya said, "She's my ears and my heart." The courtroom rippled, a rustle of clothing, a throat clearing. But Maya didn't stop. She turned next to Eli, walked across the room with soft steps, and wrapped her arms around his waist. The silence that followed was the kind that didn't need to be broken. Judge Calder lowered her gavel gently. "This court will recess for 1 hour. In the meantime, I will review custody protocols and the filed injunctions." Reporters flooded out. Eli stood motionless, one hand on Maya's back, the other resting lightly on Luna's head. Outside, the storm broke. Rain, not snow, poured down in sheets, loud against the courthouse windows. But inside, Eli finally allowed himself to kneel beside Maya and hold her, not as a stranger, not as a soldier, but as a father. The rain had not stopped since the hearing recessed. It fell in steady sheets over Kalispell, blurring the courthouse windows and soaking the stone steps where reporters lingered beneath dripping umbrellas. Inside, the tension still hung like fog in the corridors. People spoke in lowered voices, glancing at Eli's with the kind of curiosity reserved for fallen heroes or rising ones. Eli sat beside Marianne Cole in a small antechamber. He said little. Luna lay curled at his feet, her ears perked whenever footsteps echoed down the hallway. Maya sat in the far corner beside Dr. Kestner, holding a coloring pencil with intense focus, as though drawing could make the world stand still. It was then that the door opened and a man stepped inside. He was in his early 40s, medium build, thinning sandy hair combed back nervously, and a faded jacket still wet from the rain. His eyes held the haunted glaze of someone who had seen too much and kept quiet too long. Marianne stood. "Mr. Carson?" He nodded once. Name's Peter Carson. I worked at Hope Haven until last November. Maintenance and security. I got a call from one of your people. She gestured to Eli. This is Mr. Garrett. Peter's gaze moved to Eli and paused. You look like her. Eli blinked. Like who? Sarah. I didn't know her well. Just saw her once, back when she dropped off the girl. There was no paperwork filed, no formal intake. Just Simon and a lockbox. Eli stood slowly, his voice low. What do you mean a lockbox? Peter rubbed his hands together, nervous. I wasn't supposed to know, but I saw him take it from her. Wooden, carved on top, looked handmade. She said it had medical papers and the girl's real birth certificate. I heard her say, "Promise me she'll be safe." He said he'd take care of it. And then, Peter hesitated. 3 weeks later, I overheard Simon talking to someone on the phone. He said he had another viable one for international transition. That's what he called the kids' viables. You like cattle. Marianne turned to him. Do you have proof of this? Peter opened a yellow folder, slightly damp at the edges. Inside were copies, internal emails, redacted shipping invoices, even a partial list of child IDs labeled NTL pending. Among them, RAE.M_004. Peter's voice trembled now. I tried reporting it. No one believed me. Then someone slashed my tires. Then the sheriff's office said, my old warrants made me an unreliable witness. I got scared. I left. Marianne took the folder, flipping through quickly. This is enough. She stood and moved swiftly to Judge Calder's chambers. Within 15 minutes, the judge had reconvened the hearing. Eli re-entered the courtroom with Maya at his side. This time, she clung to his sleeve, not in fear, but trust. Luna followed close, tail high. Judge Calder's tone had changed. It was sharper, sterner. This court has just received new testimony from a former employee of Hope Haven, along with internal documents suggesting Mr. Simon Blake has falsified adoption records and attempted to export children under the pretense of international placement. Gasps echoed through the room. Simon shifted in his seat, his composure cracking. Sweat gleamed on his temple. Judge Calder continued. Effective immediately, the court will place a protective hold on all operations at Hope Haven. Furthermore, based on DNA evidence, the testimony of Dr. Kessner, and the illegal detention of minor Maya Ray, this court finds sufficient cause to grant Elijah Garrett full legal and physical custody. Simon stood abruptly. This is a setup. That man is unstable. He lives alone in the woods with a combat dog. Eli rose, calm but firm. That combat dog saved your victim from being lost forever. She knows what's right better than most people in this room. Calder slammed the gavel once. Mr. Blake, another outburst, and I will hold you in contempt. The room fell silent. Maya climbed into Eli's arms without being told. Luna sat at their feet, her eyes fixed on Simon as though she knew he wasn't done yet, but she was ready. Judge Calder concluded, this court recognizes Mr. Elijah Garrett as the biological father and sole guardian of Maya Ray. The motion is granted. Custody is immediate. Mr. Blake is remanded to police investigation. Outside the courtroom, reporters surged forward. Eli ignored them all. His focus was on Maya, on her hand in his, on the warmth of her cheek pressed against his chest, on Luna walking faithfully beside them, tail swinging with quiet pride. Peter Carson slipped out the side entrance, unnoticed. But his name would soon resurface, this time as a whistleblower, not a ghost. Later that night, in the cabin surrounded by whispering pines and the distant hush of a creek swollen with rain, Eli placed a carved wooden box on the kitchen table. Maya stood beside him. He opened it slowly. Inside were faded photographs, a necklace with a tiny locket, and a single folded letter. To Eli. From Sarah. But he didn't read it yet. He looked at Maya, who whispered, "Is that from Mama?" He nodded. And for the first time since this all began, he let her climb onto his lap, the past and present folding into one. The cabin lay nestled against the edge of the Bitterroot Mountains, where the pine trees stood like silent sentinels and the first heavy snow of December blanketed everything in white. It had snowed through the night, smoothing over all imperfections, fences, rooftops, broken paths, and now, under the gray-blue dawn, it looked like a world reborn, Smoke curled from the chimney of Eli's log cabin, rising like a prayer into the frozen sky. Inside, warmth pulsed in the glow of the wood-burning stove. The walls, once silent for too long, now echoed with the soft hum of something new life, tentative and tender. Maya stood barefoot on the thick wool rug, wrapped in an oversized flannel shirt of Eli's, her hair still damp from her bath. She looked small but more solid than she had ever seemed in the echoing halls of the orphanage. Luna lay nearby, stretched long across the rug, her head resting on her paws. Her ears twitched now and then, not from noise, but from instinct. At almost 8 years old, she had the calm vigilance of an animal who had seen too much yet still believed in guarding the good. Eli stood at the stove, flipping pancakes in an old cast-iron skillet. His movements were slow, measured, not from fatigue, but reverence. Every morning now felt like a ritual. The air smelled of cinnamon and pine, of something safe. Maya watched him, eyes soft. "Do you always cook breakfast?" Eli smiled over his shoulder. "Only on the days I have someone to share it with." She didn't answer, but she came forward and sat at the little kitchen table, her legs swinging above the floor. They ate together in quiet. Luna eventually padded over and sat beside Maya, resting her chin on the girl's knee. The child absently stroked the dog's head, her fingers tangling in the thick fur. Later, Eli brought down an old wooden box from a high shelf. It was the same one Sarah had left behind, the one with the carved lid, and inside, faded photographs, a pressed flower, and a locket that clicked open with a tiny portrait of a younger Sarah inside. Maya tilted her head. "She looked like me." Eli nodded, sitting beside her on the floor. "She was strong, stubborn, the kind of person who made you believe in second chances." He didn't tell Maya how Sarah had once wanted to be a poet before she became a nurse, or how, in her final letter, she wrote that if anything ever happened to her, she hoped their daughter would inherit not her strength, but her softness. That evening, they went outside. The snow had paused and everything shimmered under a cold moon. Eli helped Maya build a lopsided snowman, and Luna ran circles around them, occasionally stopping to dig her snout into the snow with fierce determination, only to come up with a stick or a glove Maya had dropped. Back inside, Eli lit a fire and wrapped Maya in a blanket. She fell asleep curled on the couch, Luna at her feet like a living shield. Eli watched them both for a long time. Later, in the quiet, Maya stirred. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad?" He turned immediately. "Yeah, honey. Are you going to leave again?" The question didn't sting. It broke. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her. "No," he said without hesitation. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him, studying his face like a map she was only just beginning to learn. "Promise?" "I promise." And something in the room shifted, not loudly, not like a door slamming shut or a storm breaking open. It was quieter than that, more like the slow settling of snow on a roof, more like a heart beginning to trust its own beat again. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Inside, 3 hearts, one old, one young, and one that had never stopped guarding, began to learn the rhythm of home. Not all families begin in the way we expect, and not every miracle comes wrapped in light. Sometimes God sends a child to sit beside a grave, a dog who hears what no one else can, and a man who thought he had nothing left, just to remind us that love still finds a way. In a world that moves too fast, it's the quiet moments that often heal the most. If this story stirred something in your heart, if you believe that love, grace, and second chances are still possible, share it with someone who needs that reminder today. Let us know what part moved you the most. And if you believe God still works in gentle, unseen ways, type Amen in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and may His peace and protection be with you now and always.